I have a question. What if the internet disappeared forever? Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, reaching for your phone as you do every day, only to discover that the screen shows nothing but a silent void. No icons loading, no messages arriving, no familiar hum of endless connectivity. At first, you might assume it is a technical glitch. Perhaps your service provider has gone down. Perhaps the router simply needs to be restarted. But as the hours stretch on and frustration turns into panic, you begin to realize that this is not an outage. This is not temporary. The digital lifeline that has tied together the modern world has vanished completely, erased without warning, leaving humanity to stumble into a reality it has not known for decades. The question is not simply how life would change without the internet, but whether civilization as we know it could even continue without the nervous system that connects every facet of its existence. For the first few hours, the consequences might appear deceptively mild. Offices remain open, cars still start, lights still shine. People continue with their routines, glancing at screens that no longer update, waiting for a signal that never comes. But soon, the illusion shatters. Air travel, dependent on digital scheduling and global communication, halts abruptly as pilots lose access to navigation networks. Financial markets grind to a standstill, their trading systems frozen in silence, wiping out the flow of money that sustains economies. Hospitals, stripped of real-time data sharing, struggle to coordinate surgeries and diagnostics. Supermarkets quickly run into chaos as supply chains reliant on online orders and tracking collapse. The hum of daily life, so effortless with the internet's invisible threads, begins to fracture. Imagine standing in a city center as crowds gather around electronic billboards that no longer flicker with news but hang dark and useless. Banks close their doors because accounts are inaccessible without digital records. Families who live continents apart can no longer exchange a simple word, their lifelines to one another severed in an instant. Governments attempt to broadcast instructions through television and radio, but the infrastructure of instant communication, once taken for granted, is gone. The silence is deafening, not because the world has grown quieter, but because the flow of information that once filled every second of our lives has ceased. The economic collapse deepens within days. Credit cards and digital payment systems are worthless. Cash, long fading into obsolescence, becomes the only currency once more. Yet so few people have it that transactions grind to chaos. Businesses that once thrived online vanish overnight. Entire industries built on streaming e-commerce, cloud services, and digital marketing disappear as though they never existed. Unemployment skyrockets, not gradually, but in a single sweeping blow, leaving millions adrift with no clear future. The psychological toll is staggering. Generations raised in an era where every question had an instant answer, where every memory was stored in the cloud, suddenly face a void that feels like amnesia on a planetary scale. People search for information in dusty libraries, stumble through streets filled with posters announcing news the old-fashioned way, and discover the unbearable weight of waiting for answers that may never arrive. Schools revert to chalkboards and textbooks, teachers scrambling to adapt to a world where instant access to resources is no longer possible. Students stare at blank screens that once connected them to classrooms across the world, forced to rediscover patience and memorization. Medicine falters as systems reliant on digital databases lose access to records of patients and treatments. Doctors resort to paper files, many incomplete or missing, while researchers find decades of studies locked away in servers that are now unreachable. Life-saving knowledge that once crossed borders in seconds is now trapped, and the progress of science slows to a crawl. Governments face a crisis of control. Borders, once managed with digital surveillance, fall vulnerable. Security systems dependent on instant alerts fail to detect threats, military communications that relied on encrypted networks fall silent, leaving nations blind to movements beyond their frontiers. Some states may turn to authoritarian measures, tightening control with physical presence, while others fracture into disarray, unable to maintain order without the threads of global communication. On the streets, confusion grows into fear, and fear hardens into anger. Crowds demand answers from leaders who have none. Rumors spread faster than truth, whispered from mouth to mouth, distorted with every retelling, creating paranoia in the absence of reliable information. Some communities might adapt with resilience. Local newspapers re-emerge as vital sources of truth. Neighbors form networks of trust, exchanging resources directly, relying on barter when digital payments are useless. Farmers become the backbone of survival, providing food in a world where online grocery stores and global supply chains are relics of a vanished age. In villages and small towns, life might return to rhythms of the past, slower but more tangible, rooted in direct human contact. Yet in megacities, where millions depend on invisible infrastructures of data and coordination, the collapse could be catastrophic. Imagine subways without digital scheduling, traffic lights failing without centralized control, skyscrapers filled with offices that cannot function without connectivity. The very architecture of modern urban life has been designed on the assumption of perpetual internet access, and without it, the towers of glass and steel feel like hollow shells. As weeks turn into months, the absence of the internet reshapes identity itself. People rediscover the art of conversation face-to-face, the patience of writing letters, the intimacy of physical presence. Yet others fall into despair, mourning the loss of communities and identities built entirely online. Entire generations who once lived in virtual spaces find themselves exiled into a reality they do not recognize. Their digital selves erased with the flick of a switch. The loss is not only practical but deeply spiritual, for the internet has become the collective memory of humanity. Without it, billions of photos, writings, stories and voices vanish into nothingness, leaving behind a silence that feels like cultural amnesia. Imagine historians of the future staring at fragments of data on disconnected hard drives, trying to piece together the story of a civilization that once spoke in endless streams of digital words, now lost like the burned libraries of ancient worlds. Yet within the ruins, opportunities may emerge. Freed from the distraction of endless scrolling, some rediscover the richness of the present moment. Artists and thinkers who once struggled for attention in the noise of digital platforms may find their voices clearer in smaller, local communities. Families torn apart by constant digital engagement may find one another again at dinner tables, their eyes meeting without the glow of screens between them. The disappearance of the internet would be both a tragedy and a revelation, a mirror showing us not only how much we lost, but how deeply we had been transformed by it in the first place. Still, the longer the silence persists, the greater the temptation grows for humanity to rebuild. Engineers and scientists would work tirelessly to recreate the networks, to stitch together new forms of connection. Nations might compete to build successor systems, sparking races not for weapons, but for digital rebirth. Some might argue that we should resist, that we should embrace the slower, quieter world, rediscovered in the absence of digital saturation. Yet the pull of connection, the need to share, to know, to belong, would likely prove irresistible. In the end, the disappearance of the internet forever would be remembered as the greatest test of resilience in modern history. A sudden exile from a world of light into a world of shadows, forcing us to confront who we are without the mirror of constant connection. The haunting question that lingers is not whether we could survive, but what kind of humanity would emerge in its wake. Would we rise wiser, more grounded, more present? Or would we stagger endlessly in longing for the vast digital ocean we once swam in? so effortlessly. And so the final thought remains like an echo in the silence. If the internet disappeared forever, would we finally learn to live fully in the tangible world before us? Or would we forever remain prisoners of the memory of a connection that defined an entire era of human existence?